Hello everybody and a very warm welcome to the Cathedral of Speed. We are here in Monza for a triple header this weekend, the penultimate event of the season for the Radical European Masters, and the formidable and daunting Monza circuit awaits the drivers over the next 60 minutes or so. It's a very warm welcome to a dark and drizzly Monza circuit from myself, Ben Evans. Alongside me is Will Brown from Radical Sports Cars, and Will, conditions qualifying this morning were absolutely atrocious. And since then it has improved somewhat, but still very slippery.
Yeah, there's no definitive the dry line on the circuit yet, despite the efforts of the last couple of championships that have been out there. So I would expect all the drivers to be starting on wets, and that's going to make things a real challenge out there as the conditions change and improve. Hopefully, if the weather stays like this, I would expect to see a dry line developing later in the race. Could
be absolutely fascinating. Here then is the driver on pole position, Victor Correa, and this weekend he, instead of sharing with John Harrison, sharing with Paddy McLuhan, and that is a very potent combination, one would suggest.
Indeed, yeah. Paddy McLuhan, of course, one of the front runners in this year's Radical Sprint Championship, and his first time out in the SR8, but he's done a very impressive job in qualifying and right on the pace. We're just seeing here, this is Stuart Mosley coming round to take the start. They had some issues in the qualifying session and actually lost that nose. That's a replacement nose on the front of the Spider.
In fact, a couple of the Spiders coming a little bit late to the grid, and that starting from the rear of the field is going to be James Abbott.
Yeah, that looks like the development Spider there. I think because they're in the invitational class, they've been asked to start from the back. But yeah, I would expect to see those pairs charging through to the front.
Returning to the Radical European Masters this weekend, it is James Littlejohn and Tony Wells, and it's Littlejohn who starts. They were front runners in the championship for a couple of seasons, and then also another new driver in the championship this weekend. Partnered with the Australian John Corbett is James Winslow. A very, very formidable talent is James. It's great to see him at the wheel of the SR8.
Yeah, real single-seater race. Some of you may know him from Formula 3 success. So great to see off on the grid. Then we've got our championship protagonist, the leader at the moment, Terence Woodward. He's starting in the number 88 SR8 with that he shares with Ross Kaiser. So they're currently leading the championship, and he'll be looking to consolidate that this weekend.
So the fans warming up in the grandstand as we look 6th on the grid, and that is Jeremy Ferguson. He's got a new driving partner this weekend in the form of Alex Capadia, so that is going to be quite something. Capadia always goes fantastically well here at Monza, and Jeremy Ferguson is no slouch either.
Yeah, and then we look over to our first solo driver there. It's number 20, Alan Costa, a really good driver, and he's improved right through the season. So he could be in line for an upset this weekend.
Alan Costa, the Monegasque, in 7th, and then 8th on the grid, the first of our Supersport class runners. It's Bradley Ellis and Andy Cummings, and it is former British GT champion Ellis who will be taking the start of the race. And this is interesting, actually, Will, because in a departure from the usual strategy, we've got a lot of the pro drivers starting the race this afternoon.
Yeah, as we've seen several times through the season, it's tended to be the lesser experienced, the gentleman driver, if you were, that's been taking the start. So yeah, I expect to see some drivers out of position, particularly with those success seconds coming in later in the race. That's a great shot there of that's Jean Gandar again, one of the solo Radical France drivers.
And then Marcello Maritotto effusively waving to the cameras from 10th on the grid. I think he's rather pleased to be there, and he will be partnering Marco Cenchetti. So the car's about to be released on their formation lap. It's a 60-minute race ahead for us in the Radical European Masters Championship. And here is how the lineup in full then, with Victor Correa and Stuart Mosley on the front row, then James Littlejohn and James Winslow row 2, Terence Woodward and Jeremy Ferguson next along, for Alan Costa and Bradley Ellis, Jean Gandar, Marcello Maritotto, Ricardo Doner and Roger Bromley. Expect to see both of them challenging for Supersport podium honours, if not maybe a little bit better if things go awry for Ellis and Cummings. And then Shaheen Nouri, Eddie Herpia, Mark Crader and Joseph Collar, and then James Abbott in the developmental Spider at the back of the field. There are Alex Capadia and Tony Wells walking back to the pit box. Well, this week there's been a lot of anticipation and build-up and calls about whether or not they made the right team selection, but you've got to say Tony Wells and James Littlejohn sticking together is probably the right call.
Yeah, absolutely, and with very experienced engineer David Sven Thompson with them as well, of course, in the Nilsson Racing squad. It's great to have them back on the grid, and they're immediately on the pace, so it just shows what a great combination that is, and they've really got the car working to their advantage this weekend, and it has been difficult right the way through free practice, the testing here. The conditions have been really quite tricky, and the nature of this unique circuit, of course, very, very famous Grand Prix venue, sitting in natural parkland with a number of trees, it takes quite a long time for the spray to sort of clear the air. So particularly on the run down through underneath the old banking or on the way up to Ascari, you can find that the spray hangs in the air for a long time, making visibility very, very difficult.
Well, they're heading in to the second of the chicanes at the moment on this formation. That weaving around is the experienced Victor Crea, who would have raced here, I think, in the Euro Formula Open, amongst other things. Stuart Mosley went so well at Spa-Francorchamps alongside Jaap Bartels. That was a non-championship event in Spa. Of course, this is actually the first championship round since the Red Bull Ring at the start of July. So they've had a couple of months to consider the championship position. The standings currently headed by Terence Woodward and Ross Kaiser, and then Manhal Alos, who isn't here this weekend, second, with then Victor Crea third in the points, and that is a great opportunity, you would suspect, for Victor to certainly climb to second in the standings, if not a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely, and I should think they've got a pretty good chance as well. At the moment, they're carrying a 55-second success pickle, so effectively 10 seconds over the standard pit stop, so they're looking pretty good in the pit stops as well. Correa's pace is without doubt very, very impressive. We saw him go incredibly well here this time last year, so yeah, they're going to be at the front for sure.
Well, the Radical European Masters, more often than not, this early October date here at Monza does produce a little bit of inclemency. It's certainly not as wet as it was back in 2013 when the Radical European Masters race turned into something of a synchronised spinning session just because the track conditions worsened so much. The thinking is that the weather will improve over the course of the next 60 minutes rather than worsen as the field pick their way through Ascari. And this is the section circuit wheel which actually comes out of the trees you'd expect to see drying off a little bit more quickly.
Yes, yeah, I'd say it's slightly more open, particularly to the left hand of the circuit there. You can see that there's sort of more open space on the run towards Parabolica. So yeah, this may well be where the track dries up first. The other thing we've got to consider as well today is that there may be the situation where the SR8s have to refuel as well. I know there's been some machinations within the paddock of whether or not they'll have to refuel. Certainly in the wet it wouldn't be necessary, but if the track dries, then fuel strategy may become an issue.
Yeah, I would suspect that it's going to be borderline, isn't it? And possibly those that can drive within themselves a little bit, preserve some fuel, might be the beneficiaries here. The lights are out on the pace car and the field bunching up side by side as they head into the notorious Parabolica corner. And when they feed out of there, they will look to the gantry when the lights change. We'll be going racing for the first of 3 times this weekend in the Radical European Masters Championship. This has been a great 2015 season so far. I'm sure that we are going to have some brilliant racing over the next couple of days. It's the orange car of Victor Crea alongside the white machine of Stuart Mosley. Then we've got the white and blue car of James Littlejohn, the black car of James Winslow. That is the front 2 rows. There are the red lights on the gantries. The field gradually pick up pace. They wait for the lights to change, which they do now, and away we go. And who's got the jump? It's a good start from Littlejohn, and he may try and squeeze past Victor Crea, and then moves back across the road to try and squeeze out Winslow. As off the road is Marcello Maratiotto trying to gain ground on Bradley Ellis, but it's Victor Crea who's got the advantage into the Rettifilio for the first time. Mosley second. Winslow would appear to have snuck through into third. Littlejohn, though, may get some better traction out of the Rettifilio. Indeed he does. Behind it's all go wrong, and it's Maratiotto, I believe, who's possibly rotated.
Yeah, that's right. Just a little bit of brief contact there in the mid-pack, but it seems that everybody else has made it through the Rettifilio unscathed. And yeah, great start by Mosley there as well to hold position. But it looked like the advantage was just held by Correa into the chicane. And now we see that Littlejohn's already made it through into second. But
Littlejohn made a mistake going into the chicane, and has that cost him on the exit? We will find out. No, it hasn't quite. Instead, though, Terence Woodward to the inside of James Winslow into the first Lesmo. Winslow trying to take the wet line to the outside. That's where we'll find more traction. And immediately looks to fight back into the second of the Lesmos. And he does this time get the traction to the outside and should reclaim that place on Terence Woodward. But Woodward gives as good as he's got, draws alongside Winslow as they begin the long sprint towards Ascari. So the race order is Carrere leads, Littlejohn second, third is Stuart Mosley, fourth is Woodward, fifth is Winslow, and sixth is Jeremy Ferguson.
And already you can see that little mistake by Littlejohn that held up Mosley as well as allowed Carrere to pull away. So already there's a little bit of fresh air for our leaders. You just see a replay there of this first corner contact.
It's Maritotto who was involved in it. Was that possibly James Abbott who got turned around?
I think it's
no,
Alain
it's
Costa.
not. It's Alain Costa, yes.
Yeah, we'll just see it from another angle there, as you can see. Spin on the entry, yeah, just momentarily tipped around there by Maritotto. Looks like everyone's back on their way again.
Through the Parabolica, then a lovely slide from Stuart Mosley, just beginning to test where the adhesion is. Now that's interesting. Mosley, is he already thinking about calling his tyres?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe just briefly had an issue there. Perhaps it did seem unusual. He pulled over to the left-hand side, but yeah, he perhaps he's looking to do the distance on that same set and save himself the need to change the tyres.
Meanwhile, Woodward a little bit deep into the Rettifilio. He manages to jink through it all. This leading septet, breaking clear sextet rather, of in 7th place Bradley Ellis. He's the first of the Supersport class runners, as Marcello Maritotto has another little moment at the Rettifilio. And the victim is one of the polystyrene blocks. Maritotto rejoins without loss of any ground. Meanwhile, the race.
You get a real good illustration there of just how tricky the conditions are. Seeing the cars do a big four-wheel slide there by Mosley as well on the way out of the chicane.
And this is where the top guys really show their mettle, because it's quite easy to have a very big moment here in Monza. And the likes of James Winslow very happy to get the car moving sideways, as he's looking for just an opportunity to get past Terence Woodward and then set off in pursuit of Stuart Mosley. A pair of them sprinting towards Ascari. Love this section of the circuit, such a narrow tunnel through the trees and then just up the slight incline into the Ascari chicane.
They've got to be really careful here, because if the conditions stay pretty much as is and it continues to be damp, they need to keep those tyres to the end of the race. And certainly if the pros are out in the car first, they need to preserve a bit of tyre grip for the guys that are in afterwards. Which you see again, that's another spin in the same place by Costa.
Well, at least he's demonstrated that he doesn't need assistance to have a spin into the Rettifilio, so he will rejoin. I don't think that will have cost him too much time, actually. He certainly didn't sustain any damage. That's a good point, Will, about the tyre preservation, because
and likewise, if it continues to rain again, these guys aren't going to want to be putting another set of wet tyres onto those cars.
Well, it's certainly very, very wet, isn't it, through the two Lesmos, but the rest of the track, you get a feeling that give it 10 or so laps and no further precipitation, and we might start to see a dry line.
Oh, and we see Carrere running wide there. That was a mistake, an uncharacteristic mistake by Carrere.
Now, does he have a problem? He raises his arm. Oh, what's that to do? I think he was just signalling that I've made a mistake and backed off.
That's right. Yeah, I think he's noting there that he hasn't. He's sort of proving that he's trying not to gain advantage. So
yeah, I don't. He certainly hasn't gained an advantage. Littlejohn begins to set about applying the pressure as they jink through the second of the chicanes, and that's not the first time that Carrere's lived a little bit dangerously in these opening couple of laps. We're on to lap 3, we're only 5 minutes in, and now we have got a fantastic fight for the lead between James Littlejohn and Victor Carrere. Carrere consults his mirrors. Littlejohn really has got the easier job here. He's got a lot of daylight between himself and Stuart Mosley in third. He can focus all his energies on trying to overhaul the Brazilian. Yeah,
he can dictate the pace at this stage, and I would think that Tony Wells is pretty much a match for McLuhan as well in the SR8. Obviously, Wells's superior experience will be a good match for McLuhan's. Certainly his match fitness. He's been racing all this year, whereas Wells hasn't. So they're going to be two very, very closely matched drivers as well. But just see again a lock up there at the rear by Carrere and bounce over the sausage curb, but.
Yeah, acknowledging straight away, I'm not gaining an advantage. Of course, it used to be that the trick in karting, you just raised your hand to get your right foot planted. Not suggesting anything of the sort, of course.
It does look incredibly tricky out there, doesn't it? You can see a lot of the drivers moving around far more than you would expect. The track must be incredibly slippery. And
we've got wave yellow flags, and it's Stuart Mosley who's in trouble on the outside of Ascari, and Mosley climbs from the cockpit And the way he's pushing the car, to me, suggests that that is mechanical. And that is a great shame, because Stuart Mosley is always one of the front runners in the Radical European Masters. And it's a real pity to see him effectively out of the race so early on.
They've not had the best of luck this weekend, unfortunately, with an incident in... Oh, and a spin there for Ferguson.
And around goes Jeremy Ferguson. That was a hot dog on the sausage curve, wasn't he? Because he spun up the rears, gets back underway. And yeah, these are very difficult conditions. And you just wonder if it's possibly an inconsistency of grip around the lap as Alain Costa takes a trip through the gravel.
Yeah, I think certainly the track is far more greasy than perhaps the spray gives light to. You know, it's a and keeps the wheels spinning there to avoid getting beached.
I think there's also a question as well, actually, as to whether or not they're being caught out a little bit by the fact having to get on the brakes a bit more for the corners, and therefore the aerodynamic grip that normally is there isn't, and that's what's suddenly causing the cars to break traction. We are on the 4th lap of the race. We're only 12 minutes or so away from the pit window opening. And our order is Victor Crair leading it from James Littlejohn. Then a big gap back to Terence Woodward in 3rd. It's James Winslow in 4th. 5th is Jeremy Ferguson. 6th and 1st Supersport runner is Bradley Ellis, as we have a look at James Abbott in the Experimental Spider, who's already scythed up through the field into 11th place. James just running over the curbs, applying a little bit of throttle, and therefore the wheels just spinning up ever so slightly. Abbott off in pursuit of Ricardo Dona. So he has dispatched Roger Bromley on this lap. Alain Costa in the SR8 also finding a way past Roger. No drama at all through Ascari for Alain Costa, as we've got a black and orange flag.
That's
for James Abbott.
Yes, yeah.
And that just means that he'll have to come into the pits and get the car looked at. We've also got a drive-through penalty for
Marcello Maritiotto.
As into the gravel trap, and in all sorts of trouble is James Winslow. Now, what happened there? The rest of the video, unfortunately, the gravel's going to be all compacted here, and he's going to rejoin, spraying stones in every direction.
Yeah, that was a slightly unusual, because that was on the exit of the chicane, wasn't it? Effectively the second half. So I don't know if he's possibly caught unawares by some standing water there.
We're seeing some very uncharacteristic errors, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. I said I think the conditions are, the track looks deceptively drier than it looks drier than it is, I believe. See him there, just a little bit of
just understeering.
Understeer, yeah, that's right.
Meanwhile, at the front of the race, Victor Crair and James Littlejohn are somehow finding a way to keep it all on the island. They are 10 seconds clear of the rest of the field and beginning to carve out a race all of their own. And you just wonder at the moment.
You see there, you can see even in just the slightest deviation off line, and there's still a huge amount of moisture in the track surface, isn't there?
I mean, driving to the track this morning, about 8 o'clock this morning, the conditions were right for launching an arc rather than going motor racing. And just the sheer amount of precipitation that came down overnight.
Yeah, you see there again another big four-wheel drift for Correa to keep it straight and narrow on the exit of the Parabolica. This is where Littlejohn's his Grand Prix Masters, his historic Formula One experience will be put to good use.
And Littlejohn looking to close right up onto Correa in the slipstream. But the challenge is, of course, that with it being so wet offline, that if you launch up to the inside, you could very quickly find yourself caught out as Correa's car snaps sideways midway through the Rettifilio. Correa, though, does a good job in blocking Littlejohn off, so Littlejohn can't gain the advantage as he comes out the Rettifilio into Curva Grande now. And Littlejohn beginning to ask all the right questions of Victor Correa. Correa just edges out a little bit wide. That will, though, give him the inside line for the next chicane. On the brakes they come. The orange car of Victor Correa maintains lead the race just from Littlejohn, who gets squeezed onto the curb.
Yeah, it's a Scandinavian flick there by Littlejohn to keep that car and get it tipped into the chicane.
And the reason they want to keep it off the curbs is that that painted surface is so slippery in the wet weather, and if you power up, you just find yourself spinning up the wheels and losing traction into the pit lane. Meanwhile, for James Winslow, he might just want one of the roll bars or the light checked over, because it did seem very strange the way he just understeered like that. Possibly he's just worried the car ingested some gravel.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, the Jack White Limited team, a new team to Radical European Masters here this weekend, will be wanting to get that car back out as quickly as possible.
Well, at least it wasn't Nicky Thumb, was it, for the Jack White team? He kept out of the barriers.
Meanwhile, back up the front, it's still situation normal. This pair scrapping just within 4/10 of each other now, and they've pulled some 12 seconds clear of third place Terence Woodward, who's actually looking pretty secure at the moment. He's got a 5-second buffer from Jeremy, so he's sitting pretty much exactly where he needs to be, you know, for the pit stops and the handover to Ross Kaiser later in the race.
And also, just with an eye towards the championship as well, even if they don't win this one, Terence Woodward and Ross Kaiser will quite happily take another podium. And additional points into the mix as Littlejohn again uses the slipstream to close right up onto Victor Crea. Ducks to the inside. Is there a way through for Littlejohn? No, there isn't. And instead, he's just showing himself in Victor Crea's mirrors, trying to make Crea make
a
the
little
mistake.
bit more cautious on the entry there this time round, and turned it a little bit earlier. And you can see that he was anticipating the car drifting on the exits of the first half of the chicane. So, yeah, this is a real game of cat and mouse.
So as we approach the pit stops, should explain that about the success seconds situation in a moment's time, as Littlejohn thinks about a move to the inside, can't do it, because the way that success through the season is balanced out in the Radical European Masters is with success seconds added to the minimum pit loop time. And what that means is the cars that finish on the podium in preceding races have a little bit more time in the pits to contend with. So for Victor Crea, he's got 10 more seconds in the pits than James Littlejohn, and Terence Woodward and Ross Kaiser likewise have got 10 more seconds in the pits compared to Littlejohn, whereas Jeremy Ferguson and Alex Qualley, well, they also have 10 more seconds. So Tony Wells, provided Littlejohn doesn't have a bit of a moment, is going to have a reasonable buffer to try and defend. But that's the beauty of these Radical European Masters races, isn't it? The strategic dimension.
Yeah, that's right. And as we've seen so many times through the year, it always gets really exciting towards the end of the races. You see drivers out of position, pros further down the order than you might ordinarily expect, fighting the way back up through. And you know, so many times this season, it's come down to a last lap battle.
So we're approaching 1/4 race distance here in the first race of the weekend, the Radical European Masters at Monza. Victor Crea leads, James Littlejohn is in second place. That's the battle we're currently following. In third place, it's Terence Woodward. Fourth is Jeremy Ferguson. Fifth, and leading the Supersport class, is Bradley Ellis. But he and Andy Cummings have got success seconds, which you can measure with a calendar. So that will leave, that's why Bradley is pushing on so much in these early stages. In sixth place, we've got Jean Gandar. Seventh, James Abbott. Eighth, Alain Costa. Ninth, Ricardo Donor. And 10th is Roger Bromley. Just running wide through the rest of the video again is Victor Crea, and this time he doesn't do a good enough job, I don't think, of blocking out James Littlejohn until it's too late. Now this is the best opportunity that Littlejohn has had throughout the course of the race as he draws alongside Crea through Curva Grande, and Littlejohn's got his nose in front, but he's taking the longer circumference, and so coming out of the turn, Crea is directly alongside Littlejohn, who's still trying to dispute it on the brakes, but has to concede to Victor Crea. But does he? Because Crea runs
across. Will he have to concede the place? I think he has, yes.
Yeah, Crea had no option there, did he? Because he ran wide, defending the position from Littlejohn, and now that James Littlejohn's through into the lead, I just wonder if he's going to romp clear. Meanwhile, serving his stop into the pits for the black and orange flag is James Abbott. The team get to work. I do like that black and gold livery on the Spider.
Yeah, it's a great classic colour combination, isn't it? And yeah, that's a development car out in the hands of works driver James Abbott. So yeah, meanwhile back at the front here now, Corea's got a real job on his hands to hold on to the coattails of Littlejohn.
Here is the fight for third and fourth place. Terence Woodward and Jeremy Ferguson running in tandem. And they have both got very, very rapid co-pilots to pass over to for the second phase of the race. Ross Kaiser will take over from that man, Terence Woodward. Alex Capadia from Jeremy Ferguson. But they have got a lot of ground to make up. Now, what that all means is that James Littlejohn and Tony Wells, they might have enough buffer here to try and drive within the car a little bit, do some short shifting, and go the distance without refuelling if it were marginal.
Yeah, and try and conserve the tyres as well. You know, it's said at the moment, it really doesn't look like the track surface is really improving as we're seeing drivers sliding around the place. So they need to think, I think, as much about tyres as fuel, if anything. So yeah, that's right. With the 10-second buffer, and if you can pull a little bit of air from Correa and just take the heat off and not need to drive so defensively, then he's going to be in a really good position for a race with him, I think. You know, certainly the fight between Woodward and his co-driver Kaiser and subsequently Capadia, I think, is going to go all the way to the wire.
So James Littlejohn already 2.2 seconds clear of Victor Correa in his first lap of clear air, which I think gives an indication of the extent to which Littlejohn is trying to get the hammer down.
Yeah, and indeed that was the fastest lap of the race, that last lap. So he's already onto a charge.
2 minutes 2.947, best part of 5 seconds quicker than qualifying this morning, which again is an indication as to just how conditions have improved, although they are still far from perfect into the first of the Lesmos for Terence Woodward. Jeremy Ferguson behind him. Then it's Alain Costa, who has climbed up into 5th place, and Costa also leading the Fangio class, which is for the drivers in the second flush of youth.
Yeah,
and a good weekend here for Alain Costa. May well see him jump Manhal in that Fangio class, the Radical European Masters.
That's right. Well, with Manhal not present at this round, he holds a 26-point deficit to Costa. So I should think with a good result here, and obviously he'll get 40 points for the class win here, he'll be able to overthrow Manhal and take the lead of that class. Just see a replay here. This looks like a brief, yeah, again, that's Marottiotto just cutting across the chicane and see if he loses the places. I think he probably does to Nori.
Our thoughts go to the polystyrene block as Littlejohn powers across the line into his 10th lap of the race. 4 seconds now, his advantage over Victor Correa, and this is great stuff from James Littlejohn, because not only is he being quick, but crucially he's being consistent, and his car has been moving around a lot less than those of his rivals.
Yeah, absolutely. The only time you've really seen him sliding is in the very, very high speed stuff, where it's been, you know, minimal steering input. It's just been the natural attitude of the car. So yeah, he's doing a really good job here to put as little pressure on the car as possible, and particularly the tyres in these conditions, and hand over the car in the best possible condition to Tony Wells.
They're also beginning to get in and amongst a little bit of the traffic as well, as a big slide then from Victor Correa in 2nd place. A big wiggle in the background as well from James Abbott as we approach 1/3 race distance.
Once more, you see him again there. Big slide out onto the runoff.
I suspect that Victor Correa probably hasn't enjoyed a stint of driving quite as much as this for a while, as his advantage over Terence Woodward is 16.1 seconds. Deficit from 1st to 3rd is 20 seconds. So now the pit window opens for the driver changes, and we can probably expect to see Terence Woodward and Jeremy Ferguson ducking in pretty early in this pit window.
Momentary there, run wide again on the entry to Ascari. Really wringing every last bit out of that, isn't he, to try and hold on to the tail of Littlejohn. Just
wonder possibly whether or not Victor Correa might be going for a chat with the race director at the end of this one, because he's had a number of trips wide, all 4 wheels off the road. Now these are the 2 cars where it starts to get interesting with regards to whether or not they peel into the pits on this occasion. Terence Woodward and Jeremy Ferguson flying in formation.
Interestingly as well, with this being such a high-speed circuit now, we're already seeing that the SR8s are starting to reach into the back markers, the SR3s towards the tail of the grid. So traffic's really going to be an issue for the remainder of the race now as well.
you'd imagine that the car they're lapping at the moment, Joseph Collett, is probably a firm fan favourite here in Monza, because the livery of the car is that of a mid-1970s Ferrari Formula 1 car.
Yeah, that classic sort of Scheckter and Lauda look-alike. Yeah, it's a really fantastic looking car, and I know all the Czech cars are all fairly distinctively liveried. It's his first outing this season, and it's great to have him back on the grid.
Joseph Collett currently in 15th, trying to chase down Mark Crader. And of course it's going to be the end of this lap that they can come in, because although the pit window opens, they've got to go past the board which says that the pit lane is open before they can make their pit stop. With an eye towards the championship, I'm very surprised that Terence Woodward doesn't come in on this occasion.
No, yeah, that's absolutely right. Although it does look like Ferguson's a little bit closer as well, so all the more reason to, I guess. You know, he doesn't want to be embroiled in a battle here with Ferguson and the potential to make a mistake.
No, the last thing you want to do is get yourself in a little bit of bother. You just want to run your own race, run at your own pace, and see how it all begins to play in a little bit later on. So they've got Mark Crader just ahead of them, looking to put a lap onto Mark fairly shortly. And it's probably this Monza circuit, isn't it, which gives the best illustration of the outright pace of the Spiders and the SR8s.
Yeah, absolutely, because of the sheer length of the run down towards Parabolica and then the main straight up to the first chicane. It's you know, these guys are certainly in the dry they would be you know, somewhere north of sort of 260, 270 kilometres an hour. You know, in the wet we're seeing those speeds are a little bit lower. They're more around the sort of 245 mark. But yeah, it's as you say, it just shows the enormous difference in performance between the 440 horsepower V8 cars in the RXC Spider and the SR8 and the 1500cc 260 horsepower SR3.
That said, 245 kilometres per hour feels plenty fast enough. It's double the UK national speed limit, as both Terence Woodward and Jeremy Ferguson run into the pit lane.
Ross Kaiser beckoning the two cars, respective teammates of course, so they'll be pitting side by side.
Into the 360 Racing pit box as Ross Kaiser about to take over from Terence Woodward. Great driving actually from both Woodward and Ferguson, neither of them having any particular issues under very tricky circumstance.
Really slick pit stop there as well. That was a great driver change there. Quick belt change from Woodward to jump out and let Ross get in. Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Alex Capadia gets on, because last year, remember at this round, alongside Tom Jordan, Alex was utterly spectacular. Yeah,
and a late sign up for this weekend, in fact, because until sort of late Thursday night, early Friday morning, he didn't even know he was going to be racing here. James Swift was supposed to be sharing that SR8 with Jeremy Ferguson, but unfortunately due to business commitments he can't be here. So a late sign up for Capadia, and I know this was the event that he was really hoping that he could attend in 2015, and yeah, he's really stoked to be out on the grid. And yeah, as you say, last year he was undoubtedly the fastest driver out there.
Meanwhile, back in the UK, James Swift attending a lot of business meetings with members of the Capadia family over the course of the weekend. As into the pit lane now comes James Winslow. That's going to be John Corbett who'll take over from him. That all-black combo for John Corbett, if nothing else, that's pretty menacing as Australian driver jumps in.
Yeah, Corbett, a front runner in the Radical Australian Cup, and had an outing at Spa-Francorchamps a few weeks ago. Really enjoyed it. So good to have him back on the grid, and just shows you sort of the scale of the Radical racing concept right around the world, that these guys can come here and be fairly competitive.
Well, certainly I'd happily give Corbett the win today if it's the only Australian triumph against British teams this weekend, as he is about to take over. Meanwhile, still squirming on the brakes there is Victor Crair. Now, I just wonder, Will, whether or not the Nielsen team gambled on a lower downforce setup here for Victor Crair in the anticipation the track would dry out a little bit later on.
Yeah, try and maximise the straight line speed a little bit, and unfortunately it looks like it's bidden them perhaps a little bit. I didn't quite catch the wing angle there. We see Marcello Maritiotto handing over to Marco Cencetti, another really quick driver here. Marco's impressed so many times, of course, a local Italian driver, but very fast in the SR3 around Monza. So yeah, I'm going to expect some fireworks as he battles his way back up the grid in this second half of the race.
James Littlejohn now the best part of 9 seconds up the road ahead of Victor Crair. This has been an absolutely magnificent drive from Littlejohn, and it's going to mean that Tony Wells will emerge with the best part of an 18-second advantage over his pursuers. Meanwhile, Joseph Koller gets out of the car. Andrev Navratil gets in. Another of the Czech competitors. And it, again, proves the global reach of Radical Motorsport. Now, that is interesting that Little John just beginning to think about cooling the tyres off a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just looking outside of the pit box here, there doesn't really appear to be any dry line developing. There's a sort of a very, very faint inkling of one, perhaps, in the middle of the start-finish straight. But really, on the whole, you'd say that it was still pretty wet out there. In fact, you can see again still a little bit of spray being kicked up there on the exit of the Parabolica.
And although the sky has been granite grey all day long, it's actually just a little bit brighter than it was 27 minutes ago when we got the race underway. We are approaching half race distance. James Littlejohn is our race leader. Second place is Victor Crea. Third is Alain Costa. Fourth is Bradley Ellis, the top Supersport runner. And none of those quartet have indeed pitted. And again, Victor Crea getting a little bit caught out on the brakes.
It'll be interesting to see. I would think, are the team going to take a gamble and perhaps put the slightly less experienced McLuhan in at almost dead halfway mark? I'm just wondering if Correa is struggling to really make any inroads into Littlejohn, whether or not they take a gamble and perhaps see if McLuhan can give it a go.
It's very easy to speculate outside of the cockpit watching the race, but it just seems as if Victor Crea possibly hasn't quite found the rhythm he'd have liked to establish, and almost it seems as if every heavy braking zone is just a moment of discomfort for him at the moment.
Yeah, the car's clearly moving around a lot more than he'd like to be doing, isn't it? And all the while, of course, that's inducing more steering input, which then works the tyres harder, which then creates more issues. You know, you sort of almost get stuck in this vicious cycle. As we see Alain Costa coming in to take his mandatory stop.
Slick work from the mechanics.
A brief drink for the Monegasque there.
Yep. And also just a little bit of work to check the tyre pressures as well to see how much they have actually warmed up during this opening phase of the race. Now, crucially, none of the SR8s we've seen in so far have refueled.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right there. So it looks like pretty much, well, yeah, certainly the 360 team are gambling on going the full distance, and we know that it can work. We saw it right at the beginning of the year. That car that Ferguson and Capadia are in this weekend, of course, the Swift car was so imperious at Jerez in the opener, and James Swift managed to make the whole run on one lot of fuel. So yeah, it's certainly possible.
Ricardo Donat in 8th place is the next target for James Littlejohn, and Ricardo also currently second in the Supersport class. The Supersport podium completed at present by Shaheen Nouri. Into the rest video again for Victor Crea, and it's the third lap in a row. The car just understeering just at the point he turns in. The tyres just aren't biting and the car just slithering offline.
Another tiny little lock up there on the front left wheel, and yeah, he, as you say, he looks uncomfortable there, doesn't he?
Yeah, at what point do the team pull in Victor for Paddy McGlynn? Of course, it could be that they've actually just gone the wrong way on setup and they're kind of a little bit lumbered what they got. Meanwhile, in comes Yanni Herpia. Finnish driver rolls to a halt. He also is going to receive a change of drink bottle. Now, what's been really interesting with James Littlejohn is that he has barely put a wheel on the white line or the curbs at any point during his stint.
Yeah, you could just hear then his throttle progression was really, really steady, almost sort of very, very gingerly on the throttle. But it's obviously paying dividends because he can keep the rear end of the car pointing in the right direction and again minimise the steering input. And that's what it's all about with these cars. You really do have to not so much nurse them around in these conditions, but it's all about minimal steering input. That's undoubtedly the fastest way to drive any Radical, even wet or dry. If you look where you want the car to go, and small consistent steering inputs will put the car where you want it. As soon as you start to hustle, then you overdrive and you work the tyres, and that's when you start to find the pace drops off.
Victor Crea just shy of 11 seconds back from our race leader James Littlejohn, as we have 29 minutes remaining, and Crea running out very, very wide into the Parabolica. And Victor is an incredibly talented driver. I'm struggling to think they maybe didn't, that they have taken a gamble on the setup here, maybe working on the basis the track was going to dry out a little bit more rapidly than it has.
Yeah, it looks like he's running very little wing there, and single front dive planes on the front, which is a little bit unusual. But yeah, as you say, maybe they've oh, again, big skip there. Yeah, that car looks quite firm, doesn't it?
It's really struggling to get it slowed down.
I'm just wondering if whether or not they might. He'll have to be careful, because if this continues, they may put a black and white flag out for him.
Yeah, he's probably going to get arm cramp as well. He's been waving at the marshals, Rettifilio, quite a lot.
Meanwhile, back at the front now, and we see this is Capadia challenging Kaiser for track position. At the moment, they're 5th and 6th respectively. But yeah, Capadia right on the tail of Ross Kaiser, and this is going to be a fantastic battle. Two really closely matched drivers in almost identical cars as well.
This will be really fascinating as well, with an eye towards the championship, whether Ross Kaiser possibly, you'll see how well he can defend from Capadia, because into Ascari now there is what looks like the beginnings of a very clear dry line through the chicane. They've got Jean Gandar up ahead of them, and that is actually a fight for track position. So although Gandar moves aside, or in fact he just moves to the racing line, this is the fight for 4th, 5th and 6th, as Kaiser looks to the inside of Jean Gandar. He gets past, so does Alex Capadia. And now Capadia looks to line up the move on Kaiser coming through the Parabolica. All the drivers were told very firmly in the drivers' briefing last night that the white lines are the track limits, and therefore not to put all the car over them, as Capadia powers past Kaiser in the slipstream along the start and finish straight.
Yeah, brilliant slingshot there, and very wide out the Parabolica, and that gave him a fantastic slingshot to pull past and get the advantage over Kaiser. But I'm sure this will be far from over, and we know that Ross is one of the smoothest drivers out there. He's you know, fantastic. He's really good at dictating a race pace and conserving all the way to the end. So there could still be a sting in the tail here for Alex.
And also very smart driving from the 360 team. I suspect they've been telling them, don't fight too much amongst yourselves, because if you work in tandem and keep setting the quick laps, you do stand a good chance potentially of even coming through to score victory. Meanwhile, Victor Crair jumps out and gets an immediate word from Stuart Mosley. Paddy McLuhan jumps in. See what McLuhan can make of it, and essentially these are the cars who will be immediately looking to chase Paddy McLuhan. They are currently working through the Lesmos, so they're about half a lap away from the static car of Paddy McLuhan in the pits. James Littlejohn will most likely stay out until the very tail end of this pit window. Yeah, and with the issues that Correa's had, he was able to build a 21.4 second buffer before Correa pitted. So he's really going to be sitting pretty at the top end of this grid. Meanwhile, the sky, I have to inform you, is looking a little bit darker once more, as yes, Ross Kaiser coming straight back at Alex Capadia, sitting in his slipstream, making sure that Alex is well and truly aware as to his presence. In the back of the shot, you can see James Littlejohn. These cars, don't forget, slightly false track position because Littlejohn has not yet made his pit stop, but nonetheless, comparison of lap times will be interesting. Now, here emerging from the pits is Paddy McLuhan with a very significant buffer, in fact, over Capadia and Kaiser.
Now, the question is here, if the setup of that SR8 wasn't to Correa's liking, is it to McLuhan's liking? I'm not so sure what they're sort of... It's very difficult to tell what their relative what they like in a car setup. So this will be interesting.
I think it really depends actually how comfortable you are running through that layer of aerodynamic grip and starting to play with the mechanical grip levels.
Well, and the way you react when the car starts to slide, as you say, when you reach the limit. And the thing with the SR8 is because it's got a more rearward weight bias than the SR3 that McLuhan's used to, it is going to move around more. You know, he's going to find that there's a slightly more pendulum. You've really got to be a little bit more careful on the exit of the corners. When you get on the power, the car sort of needs to be, you know, pointing more in a straight line than the 3, where you can sort of carry much more corner speed and pit the throttle up slightly earlier.
Now, interestingly, last time around, James Littlejohn was 0.8 of a second quicker than Alex Capadia. He was 1.2 seconds faster than Ross Kaiser. Now, all that serves to do is just increase the ground that Capadia and Kaiser are going to have to close up on Tony Wells post pit stops. And don't forget as well that Little John and Wells have got a pit stop which the mandatory minimum time is 10 seconds under that which was required of Kaiser and Capadia.
Yeah, there's only 3.5 minutes remaining of the pit stop window, so they're going to have to stop in the next, well, certainly in the next 3 laps, possibly in the next 2, depending on whereabouts he is on the track. So I guess in the next couple of minutes we'll have our answer.
Bradley Ellis grudgingly moves aside to allow Capadia pass. Now, crucially though, Kaiser doesn't find a way past Bradley Ellis into the parabolic. Now that, for the first time, has given a chink of life.
Ellis doing his best to fight back there. Unfortunately, has to run right out wide, run out by Capadia onto the runoff. But did his best there. He said that demonstration of how much more corner speed you can carry in a 3.
Alex Capadia sets his personal best lap of the race at 2 minutes 2.5. It is the not quite the fast lap of the race, as now into the pits comes James Littlejohn. He will be handing over to Tony Wells. So it's going to be really at the end of the next lap when we'll understand the gaps that need chasing down. Capadia across the line, 9.2 seconds back as well from Paddy McLuhan. So we could be in for a little bit of a thriller.
Yeah, so this morning there was about a sort of 7-second lap difference between Littlejohn and Wells' pace. Oh, big slide there by McLuhan, and now he's got that looks like the S.
That is John Corbett.
Yes, Corbett, isn't it? Right on his tail.
Oh, and Paddy McLuhan is finding the car every bit as tricky, I think, as Victor Crea did.
That's right. He's going to be getting a massive masterclass in the relative handling differences between the 3 that he's been so dominant in this year and this SR8.
McLuhan, however, is in second place in the race. He came into that with the best part of 10 seconds over Alex Capadia. So there's every opportunity here for Paddy McLuhan to bring the car home on the podium as Tony Wells ventures out of the pit lane, and Wells is going to emerge with, if not an unassailable advantage, certainly a very, very comfortable one, but it depends how comfortable he is going to be with this damn track.
Look up the road, there's no sign of McLuhan in the distance just yet.
Still no sign of Paddy McLuhan.
Oh, look at that. So there you go. That's a fantastic lead to have, he'd be delighted to have got back out on track there with good clean air between him and the chasing pack.
Well, it was a 10-second shorter pit stop plus whatever.
Now McLuhan comes into view.
Across the line from Paddy McLuhan, a 2 minutes 5.7. Now, what can Alex Capadia offer up in third? That's going to be the big question. And Capadia, a 2 minutes 3.0, 6.6 seconds back from Paddy McLuhan. It's going to be at the end of this, the 19th lap of the race, that we'll find out what Wells' advantage is.
McLuhan all the while, though, outbraking himself there and skipping over the rumble strips just as Correa did a few laps earlier.
Certainly a school of thought which says if Paddy McLuhan's able to get that car to the line without having had a spin, he will have done masterfully well. It's exactly the same, isn't it, as Victor Crea? So at that time it was the weight transfer, wasn't it? Just beginning to move the rear of the car. Here is our race leader, Tony Wells. We have got exactly 1/3 of the race remaining. This is a golden opportunity for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn to have a winning return to the Radical European Masters. Into the pit lane is Ricardo Dona. Now, don't forget, although it's out of window his stop, you've got to go past the board that says pit lane closed.
That's right. I think he was peeled into the pits at sort of 20 minutes and 5 or 6 seconds. So he was actually sort of a lap within the allowance anyway. As you say, he has to pit. If he'd passed the pit, well, that was the last opportunity. Yeah. If he'd passed the board, then that would have been too late. But a good stop there, a good late stop.
Bradley Ellis is the only driver who is yet to make their pit stop. Not altogether unsurprisingly right. Tony Wells has just come across the start and finish line, past Will and I's commentary position. We now wait. In second place, it's this man, Paddy McLuhan. In third place, it's Alex Capadia. Fourth is Ross Kaiser.
Yeah, noticeably closer now, as you say. You can see that gap's really closed up with the little couple of spins and issues that McLuhan's had on that opening lap.
Across line comes Paddy McLuhan now, 27.9 seconds back from Tony Wells. In third place, Alex Capadia, another 2.2 seconds he gains on Paddy McLuhan. And Capadia, 2 minutes 2.6. It's going to be, as Mark Croder emerges from the pit lane, going to be absolutely fascinating here, isn't it? As it's Capadia's turn to get it all a little bit tricky through the opening chicane. It's going to be fascinating the extent to which McLuhan, Capadia and Kaiser are able to close up onto Tony Wells. Meanwhile, Bradley Ellis, the last of the late pit stoppers, in to hand over to Andy Cummings. Now they have got very, very substantial success seconds. 100 seconds in the pits, 10 seconds longer than anybody else in the race, with the exception of Ricardo Dona. So we'll keep you appraised of the Supersport battle as and when it works itself through. Right.
Yeah, and Capadia being quite brave there, kicking a big bite of the curb on the exit of the chicane. So, yeah, as you say, I'm just wondering if we're getting to that phase where the tyres are just starting to sort of go past their, well, certainly they'll be past their peak, but whether or not they're just starting to get to that point when we'll see these guys, even though they've been fairly smooth through the opening stages of the race, whether or not they're going to have given their best.
Well, through the opening section on the lap, Tony Wells was actually a little bit quicker than both Capadia and McLuhan, and Wells quicker than McLuhan through the second sector. He's only 7/10 slower than Alex Capadia, about a second slower than Ross Kaiser. And this is starting to look very nice indeed for Tony Wells at the front of the field.
That was a bit of a hair-raising moment there for Kaiser as he ran really wide out onto the runoff, only to be confronted by grass as the runoff finished. So that looks like the development car being pushed back into the garage there for some investigation.
Yeah, the development work continues on the Spider, but it has been going very rapidly as, again, just the ghost of a dry line now at the Parabolica as this group of cars surge through. Wells' advantage over McLuhan goes out. Capadia 29.7 seconds back. He last time through was 2.5 seconds quicker than Tony Wells, and I don't think that's going to be enough for Capadia to get on to terms with Tony Wells and snatch victory.
No, and this what this has allowed, though, as you can see now, this fight flows right up for second position. Capadia's got McLuhan in his sights, and you know, in that last chicane there again, a little bit of a mistake by McLuhan to sort of brake and really lost a load of speed on the entry.
Meanwhile, setting the fast lap of the race last time through was Ross Kaiser. Kaiser looking to stick with them as that was a little bit close. Capadia moved across and just had to take it on faith that Andy Cummings wasn't going to get a little bit caught out by the braking zone offline, and you just would sense it's only going to be a matter of a lap or so before McLuhan comes under a real challenge for that second place from Alex Capadia, if not a little bit sooner. Here they go then into the second of the Lesmos, and then the run towards Ascari. Ross Kaiser now completes that lappery of Andy Cummings. Cummings to the fore of the Supersport class from Ricardo Dona and Marco Cenchetti. That is our understanding of the order. It will be definitive at the end of this lap as Capadia gets a good run through Ascari and now will surely challenge Paddy McLuhan en route towards the Parabolica. He pulls out of the tow almost immediately, but it's going to be McLuhan who's going to have the inside line. Capadia, I suspect, will just feel a little bit more emboldened on the brakes, but McLuhan, determined to hold on to the inside, does a great job. He gets the car stopped on the way in, slithers out wide, and now Alex Capadia is surely going to find a way past Paddy McLuhan as they accelerate through to complete their 21st lap of the race. But it's now the turn of McLuhan with a little bit less in the way of rear wing. Yes, it's down it's a notch lower, isn't it? You can see.
Yes, yeah. Now you can see they said the relative setups with it, you know, so closely following Kaiser, and he did following Capadia there. He did a good job actually, but as soon as he realised he'd relinquished the place, to tuck straight back in behind Capadia and use that toe to keep on his tail, and getting the power down really early there on the exit from that entry first chicane.
Was it Mario Andretti who said that the thing that a racing driver really needs is an educated right foot? And no more is that true than he's still doing a fantastic job on his first day here at Big School. You know, he's done
very, very narrowly missed out on the Radical Sprint Championship this year, did McLuhan, and he's been one of the fastest drivers without a doubt for the last 2 seasons, and now he's showing that pace in the SR8 as well.
I wish my first day at big school had been Monza. Meanwhile, mind you, that said, he is... now, where is Ross Kaiser? Because Kaiser's suddenly dropped a couple of seconds back from that group of cars, which suggests he got caught a little bit in traffic. Still waiting for Kaiser to appear, and he's not there, is he? And in fact, Kaiser through the first sector, a 45-second first sector for Ross Kaiser. Now, was that a moment that we didn't catch on camera, or is that possibly indicative of something a little bit more serious for Ross, which could have significant bearing?
Just wait to see what his second sector comes up as, but yeah, could. Just wondering if he perhaps had a spin out of shot, but I'm sure we'll find out in a few moments.
51.1.
No, it's another slow sector, yeah, 51. That's a good 8 seconds off the guys in front of you, so I wonder if he's nursing a problem now.
Yeah, that is a little bit concerning.
Certainly for the championship title, of course, that pairing, him and Woodward, currently leading the standings.
And comfortably so. A solid points haul this afternoon would have been just what they needed. Here is Ross Kaiser. Oh dear, that is not good. A little bit of smoke trailing from the rear of the car. Kaiser limps on. It's hard to see if that's bodywork rubbing or something from the internals, though.
Yeah, and one would hope that it's certainly not fluid, because things are slippery enough out there. And oh, we see a spin for McLuhan there.
Paddy McLuhan runs it around. Now, has he kept the engine alive? Yes, he has. Third place McLuhan is looking still very, very solid, because he's the best part of a minute clear of Alain Costa. So now Alex Capadia well and truly released to see what he can do about Tony Wells. Wells is 24 seconds up the road ahead of him. As, yeah, a big bite of curb on the way into the Rettifilio there.
Just unsettled the car, and sure enough, it caused him to rotate.
It's the right idea from McLuhan. I think he was just trying to get the car hooked over the curb to just give it a little bit of momentum through the turn-in. Now, at the rate of capture, although Tony Wells will be reeled in, he won't be caught by the end of the race. It's Tony on his 23rd lap, exits Ascari, runs along towards the Parabolica. Now, none of the SR8s refueling. They all clearly feel that they have got enough available to them to make it through to the end of the race without fuel being a concern. And Tony Wells taking absolutely no chances whatsoever.
No, and again, actually doing a really good job here. And like Littlejohn, his co-driver, he's mirroring his driving style. Again, minimal steering inputs, and really, so far, looks pretty much mistake-free. He's doing, hopefully that's not the commentator's curse, but no, doing a very good job out there in front and dictating the pace. You know, still lapping that last lap there at 2:03.9, so he's doing a great job up front.
Absolutely fantastic job from Tony Wells.
Look at that. See, very, very little. That car's going exactly where he needs it, undoubtedly. It's certainly the most planted of these lead SR8s.
Super smooth stuff from Wells. A 2:01.2 though for Alex Capadia. The fastest lap of the race, which does suggest the track is just beginning to speed up in these latter stages. Capadia 21 seconds back from Wells. He's got 10.5 minutes to chase down that deficit, and really he needs double that based on the current rate of capture, except to say, of course, this is maybe the last thing that Wells and Littlejohn would want is changeable track conditions, because you want at least a degree of consistency. As it is for Wells, he'll be finding probably each and every time that he arrives into the Lesmos, he can just ask a little bit more of the car and it will give it.
If those wets have given their best, then yeah, he he said it's like the diminishing returns all the time. He's just going to find that the car feels more and more uncomfortable, and then you get back into his vicious circle again. But right now he's doing a brilliant job. Yeah, look at that. It's just very, very smooth.
I think it's more likely to have been Alex Capadia who'll have possibly used the tyres a little bit more, as the black and white flag does indeed now go out to car 52 for track limits, which is Paddy McLuhan's orange car in third place. McLuhan losing about 15 seconds to Alex Capadia through that spin. Ross Kaiser continues to circulate because he's going to do his utmost to get classified. Here is McLuhan. He is about to put a lap on to Jean Gandar. In the Supersport class, it is Andy Cummings who leads from Marco Ciancetti and Riccardo Dona, but Ciancetti is closing on Andy Cummings at a rate of 6 seconds a lap. So there's every chance that the Supersport class is going to change in the remaining couple of laps. That lap from Tony Wells, a 2:03.8, so again Wells a little bit quicker than he was on the previous occasion. Capadia at 2 minutes 0.9. Now that starts to become quite interesting. 18.4 seconds.
Yeah, it's only eight and a half, just under 8.5 minutes remaining though, so we can see potentially another 5 laps, I guess, before the checkered flag.
Now, 3.5 seconds at 5 laps is just about bang on schedule. So that could get really fascinating.
Paddy being really careful here. Doesn't want to cause any contact between him and the Spider of Gandar, but it looks like Jean's moved out of the way and allowed him to get through.
I think Paddy was probably a little bit more anxious about just being able to claim the apex as he wanted to. But he does that without any concern. Runs through Curva Grande where, yes, there is now sort of half a dry line. Here is Tony Wells in and amongst a little bit of the traffic. That's Shaheen Nouri, who is not quite lapped on the way into Ascari, but again, Tony isn't going to take any risks here, is he? And he has no need to. That middle sector for Tony Wells, a 42.9.
I'll tell you what you can see though, you can just start to see the little bits of rubber starting to come from those tyres now that the line's drying up. There is a little bit of rubber being flicked up into the air behind that car, which suggests that the tread blocks are a little bit past their best on those wets. And the Dunlop wets, as we've seen, they've got a very, very broad operating window and they work really well in these drying conditions. But, you know, there's only so long they'll last before they just start. And what you'll find as the car slides around, that tread block will move more and more and generate more heat. And then as the rubber softens, it'll just start to slowly roll off.
That was a 2 minutes 4.6 for Tony Wells, reflecting the time that he lost getting past Shaheen Nouri.
Be interesting to see if Capadia can just slip into the sub 2 minute lap. Oh no, it's
2 minutes
2:01. So it's similar pace difference to the previous lap.
So again, 3.5 seconds, 14.8 seconds, 6.5 minutes remaining. Now what that is beginning to say to me is that as the track is drying, they've just gone past that balancing point between the tyres still working and the lap times coming down, and now the tread block's moving around and it starts to become all a bit more uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the psychological difficulty here, of course, is that there might be radio messages asking, not necessarily asking Wells to push on, but he'll be aware that gap is diminishing between him and Capadia, and of course if he pushes too hard, then he's going to wear the tyres out even faster. So it's that difficult thing of whether or not you bide your time and keep the lap times consistent in the hope that the tyres will give their best all the way to the end of the race, or whether you push early to try and gain some more space. But that possibly could compromise you by the flag.
All credit to Tony Wells. He is driving so smoothly, so gently but effectively. It's like he's got a litter of baby kittens alongside him in the cockpit of the car, because through the corners he is just so progressive on the turn in, not putting any more load through the tyres than he absolutely has to, waiting until the car's squared off out the corner
there, and the
now
grip,
he
and look at that,
accelerates.
are really smooth. I mean, this is a masterclass really in these conditions. He's doing a fantastic job. This is considering he is supposed to be the lesser experience of the two drivers, but no, this is sterling stuff from him. He's doing a very, very impressive job indeed.
Heads through the Parabolica. We have got just over 5 minutes left in the race, so we're going to have time for 3 more laps. As
just wait to see the gap to
2:04.1. I suspect that Capadia, as he comes on the start finish straight now, isn't going to have quite enough time. At 2 minutes 0.2, fast lap of the race, 10.9 seconds at 4 seconds a lap, which it was last time round. It's just about on. This is going to be a grandstand finish, and what it certainly means is that Tony can't afford to slacken the pace at all in order to look after the tyres. He's going to have to push on, as John Corbett was doing, maybe a little bit too vigorously.
Yeah, just see a rotation there, gets the car pointing back in more or less the same direction.
No.
Does he get the car restarted?
I think he probably has done. Certainly no waved yellow
No
flags.
indication of yellows, no, absolutely not.
Here in third place is Paddy McLuhan. Has a big slide, but Paddy and Victor Crare, nonetheless.
To be fair to this pairing, considering the sort of the thrills and spills they've had throughout this race, actually to have taken third away from the end of the race would be, I think, a pretty good result for them. I think they'll feel pretty relieved considering what might have been.
Yeah, I think if you or I had been behind the wheel, we'd have been having a 55-minute chat with the marshals waiting for the checker flag. As it is, to get third place with a car that they took a gamble on the setup, and now actually it's coming to the fore. McLuhan set the car's best lap of the race last couple of laps to go. As here is Alex Capadia, 3.5 minutes remaining. We're about to start the penultimate lap of the race, and again, Capadia substantially quicker than Tony Wells. Now there is the deficit between them. It's about 2/3 of the length along the back straight, and this isn't done and dusted just yet. It's going to be fascinating, but is that just a sticker?
That's just
flapping?
a little bit of tape, isn't it? Possibly,
Yeah.
I think quite often you'll see the drivers will tape up those vents that go over the front wheels to avoid getting covered with spray in the wet conditions. I think that's just a little bit squirt loose, nothing to worry about there. But
Tony Wells, a 2:03.3. Alex Capadia, a 1 minute 59.4. The gap is 7 seconds. Well,
with 2 laps remaining, this is really going to go down to the wire.
it certainly is. 3.9 seconds is what it came down by last time round, and that rate of capture is enough to give Alex Capadia a shot at Tony Wells into the Parabolica on the last lap of the race. Absolutely brilliant stuff. You said at the start of the race, Will, that we have had some lively finishes this season.
Oh, we're just going to see a brief bit of contact here between... Oh!
Wasn't really a brief bit of contact.
That's right, fairly hard impact there by Cummings up the rear of Cenchetti there into the chicane.
And that was for the lead of the Supersport class. So Marco Cenchetti moves to the lead of the Supersport class. Andy Cummings, depending on how quickly he got going, certainly slipped to second, may have dropped to third. In fact,
I'm guessing there
behind
that
Riccardo
Cenchetti had taken the position perhaps on the run between Parabolica and the first corner, and that was Cummings' attempt to maybe try and take the place back.
Here is Tony Wells. He was half a second slower than Alex Capadia through Sector 1. What about Sector 2? Through the second sector, 41.6 for Tony. A 41.0
yes.
for Alex Capadia. And that's not quite enough for Alex, is it? And that's why he's bottled up behind one of the SR3s. Now, that might just be enough for Tony Wells, because that gap, although it's come down, hasn't come down by anything like 3.5 seconds over the course of this lap, and that could well be enough for Tony Wells to come through and take victory. He is about to start the final lap of the race now as he accelerates over the start and finish line, which is at the top of the straight as well. Don't forget that the run from the Parabolica to the flag is pretty brief. Capadia was only 3 seconds quicker than Tony Wells. It's 3.9 seconds between the pair of them.
Yeah, he's quickly got on the pace after passing that SR3. So, yeah, has that been the salvation that Wells needs? It's difficult to tell at this stage, as you say. There's so little in it.
Is going to feel like the longest 2 minutes of Tony Wells' career, probably even longer for the rest of the team on the pit wall, and James Littlejohn, his co-driver. But Tony Wells, as we have been saying throughout the race, hasn't put a wheel wrong, has he?
Just see at 3.7, so just lost a couple of tenths in that first sector.
Yeah, not very much at all. It's through this middle sector where Alex Capadia has been so impressive, and this time there is no traffic. Just a little bit of a twitch there from the Taylor Wells car suggests that his tyres are possibly beginning to feel somewhat second-hand, but Capadia is not close enough, is he? He's going to have an absolutely astonishing run through Ascari to get into Wells' slipstream to challenge him for the Parabolica.
Yeah, second sector times here again. Oh, just 8 tenths, so
2.8 seconds, and surely Alex Capedia is not going to bring that down just through the final sector. It has
Given
been
his all there, runs right out wide on the exit of Ascari to give himself the best opportunity to try and catch up to Wells. But I think it's going to be all in vain there, as there's just too big a gap, isn't there?
We won't anoint Tony Wells until he's negotiated the Parabolica safely, but he gets the turn in absolutely spot on. Now he can plant his right foot and he accelerates out of the Parabolica. It's going to be victory in the first race of the weekend in the Radical European Masters to Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. An absolutely magnificent performance from the pair of them as Capedia runs out of fuel at the final turn, and Alex Capedia wiggling the car to the line. He and Jeremy Ferguson take second place, and McLuhan's run dry on the final lap. Paddy McLuhan in trouble on the final lap of the race. He went into lap 80 seconds clear of Alain Costa. Now, what is that? Was that a fuel issue? Was that a spin coming out of Lesmo for Paddy McLuhan? We will find out. Well, what
big last lap drama there, but an imperious drive by Wells and Littlejohn there. Fantastic, really dictated the pace from the start, and did a fantastic job in those really challenging conditions as the track dried out to stay on the track and stay out front.
But who's going to come home in third place? Here is Jean Gandar. He is a lap down, and across the line comes Jean. That is going to give him fifth position, and he has had a great drive actually, staying.
The big question is, where is Alain Costa? He was fourth on our timing screens, but I'm just wondering if on that last lap whether or not he's been able to take McLuhan.
We watch and await it with excitement. I think McLuhan is okay, but only just, judging by McLuhan gave away 40 seconds to Alain Costa through the second sector. Tony Wells might well pass both of them en route to Parc Ferme. Wells is on his way. Marco Cencetti has come through. He has won the Supersport class alongside Marcello Maritotto. Second place in the Supersport class has gone to Ricardo Dona, and third to Andy Cummings and Bradley Ellis. We have still got two cars that are yet to make it to the checkered flag, and it is Alain Costa who gets third. There we saw a glimpse of Paddy McLuhan static at Ascari. Alain Costa taking third place on the last lap of the race.
Yeah, so a mechanical issue, whether that's fuel or something else, that's caught out McLuhan on the last lap.
Let's have a look then at the final classification then. Tony Wells and James Littlejohn winning it from Alex Capedia and Jeremy Ferguson. Third place to Alain Costa. Fourth, Victor Correa and Paddy McLuhan. Fifth, Jean Gandar. Sixth, and Supersport winners Marcello Maritotto and Marco Cencetti. Seventh, Ricardo Dona. Eighth, Andy Cummings and Bradley Ellis. Ninth was Roger Bromley. 10th, Shahin Nouri. And then Yanni Herpia with John Corbett and James Winslow. All sorts of problems for them, but they were running at the flag in 12th place. Absolutely brilliant racing. Wonder what happened for Terence Wilbert and Ross Kaiser. That will have given their championship challenge a little bit of a knock, and the same for Stuart Mosley and Jaap Bartels. For James Littlejohn and Tony Wells on their return to the Radical European Masters, they are victorious here in Monza.
Yeah, fantastic job on their return to the Radical European Masters, and look at that, James Littlejohn understandably delighted, and he did a really good job there, and took a strong advantage off the lead, and just grew that couple of seconds that he needed to take the heat from Correa, and I think that really set them up well for the rest of the race.
And what we probably didn't really get an appreciation of as well is just how perfectly they managed their fuel load as well, given the seeming troubles for others through the final lap of the race.
Well, as we've seen, it was clearly marginal, and there is the opportunity, there is the option for the SR8 guys to take on fuel during the pit stop if they wish. So, unfortunately, it looks like that's caught a couple of drivers out. So, depending on the conditions, of course, for tomorrow's two races, if it stays entirely wet, they may still continue to gamble, or whether or not we see those guys refueling.
Well, you'll be able to join us, of course, live tomorrow at 10:25 Central European Time for the first of tomorrow's races, and then at 3:20 Central European Time for the second of the races. The weather forecast is not looking fantastic, but we will certainly be in for another pair of superb contests. I think we're going to have quite a pause here for the podium, because because with Alex Capadia broken down or running out of fuel elsewhere, he will have a long walk to the rostrum. Therefore, it's time for Will Brown and myself, Ben Evans, to say thank you very much for joining us here at Monza this afternoon. Absolutely brilliant racing. We'll look forward to you joining us tomorrow for the second race of the weekend at 10:25 Central European time. Until then, it's goodbye from Italy.